You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, everyone, today we're going to be talking about financial abuse. And, I think this is a spectrum. We've done episodes in the past talking about relationships, talking about speaking to your partner, your spouse, your loved one about money. We've talked about when that kind of goes to the dark side or starts to get sour, where there's maybe an individual that's acting against your best interest in the context of financial infidelity, maybe making purchases, signing up for credit cards that you're not aware of, doing things that are not in line with your theoretical long-term financial goals. What about when it goes even farther? What about when you find yourself or realize that you are the victim of financial abuse, where an individual is using your finances to put you in a box, to control you, to prevent you from being able to make decisions that are in your best interest? How do you claw your way out of that? And what if during the process you find out that the actual system is stacked against you to prevent you from being able to claw your way out of that situation? Today, we're going to be speaking with Rachael Partleton. This is her story, and this is her mission. We're going to be dealing with what financial abuse looked like in her situation, what she found out about the system as she tried to reclaim her financial life, and now, with the benefit of that information, that horrific process, what she's doing about it for individuals that are still stuck. So to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, you set this up perfectly here. Rachel's story is so important. It's so important for millions of people who are experiencing something quite similar and they don't know where to turn, right? And she talks about how she's experienced this economic abuse, this economic trauma. And now she's turned it into saying she's passionate about economic empowerment. And I think it is such a critical message, and I really can't wait to talk through Rachel's story and how people hearing her story can move forward and take this as empowerment to make their own lives better. So with that, Rachael, welcome to the ChooseFI podcast.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, we're excited that you're here, and this is a topic that we've never gone here before, and not because we didn't want to, but to be honest, partially because it's just outside of our own scope of experience. We couldn't speak to it with any authority, and maybe to some degree, like many people in our audience, we didn't realize how devastating this was and how little support is out there for individuals that are going through this. So for context, I would appreciate it if you would give us a little bit of your backstory. At what point you realized you're in this relationship, you were experiencing financial abuse, and how did that manifest in your day-to-day life?
So it's probably moments after I'd left and realized the nature of the relationship. There were definitely times during the relationship where I felt certainly uneasy, and I had expressed that I felt that he was taking over. I felt that he was controlling lots of things. I felt like I didn't really have a full choice over the changes to the mortgage and the deeds, but it was just kind of swept underneath the carpet and as if that didn't matter. But it was really, I think the penny was just kind of dropped up once I'd kind of got some space and some distance from the relationship and decided to get out. And I think it dawned on me as well how hard, like I had this sense of, I know this is going to be really difficult to get out of. And I think a lot of like victim survivors of domestic abuse say the same thing, that it's something that goes on behind closed doors, that it's like this invisible crime that is so hard to prove to the outside because to everyone else it looks like a healthy relationship and you look as though you're in control. I had a successful career. I looked like somebody that wouldn't be walked over, but yet still I found myself in that position.
So for context, the length of this relationship that you were in, was this your husband? How did it start with changing the mortgage and the deed? Just give us a little sense for the creeping, insipid nature of this.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually with him for 10 years in full, and it really wasn't till right at the end that I kind of realized what happened. But I can look back now and think, God, yeah, that was like a bit weird. That made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So, for example, when I moved in with him, he said that I needed to change the bank account that I had. And he said he had good reasons for it. So he said, oh, if you change to this bank account, you get like £100. It'd be really good for you to just take advantage of that offer. And then we can link our bank accounts together. We can have a joint account. And he was like, I'm not asking that we only have a joint account. You have your own separate private account. We just have the joint account for bills and paying the rent and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, that seems like fine. I'm on board with that. And then gradually, like as time went on and we moved into a flat that I had bought, I'd actually done all of the work for that myself, like save the deposit and kind of got into that. I actually realized what was going on, but he was offering to help me out with bills. I had a really busy job. I didn't really have lunch breaks. And he said, oh, let me help you. Let me deal with this for you. I'll do all the calls round. I'll sort out some bills for you whilst you're busy. So I didn't realize actually he had put his name on pretty much every single bill and taken charge or taken control of every single utility that there was. I actually didn't even know what was going on with anything. And I was like, it's kind of like an advantage because I'm not having to worry about it. But I also had no idea what was going on with it at the same time. But I trusted him. I thought it was a loving relationship. So I went along with it. And then, although it was my property, it was a flat that I had bought all on my own. He said, you can save a lot of money. You're spending too much on your mortgage. Why don't you try and get out early? And I said, you know what? I don't think that's a good idea because the get out fee would be really significant. And I don't see the point in paying an extra however many grand. And he was like, yeah, but like your interest rate is so high. If we put it together, it would be really low. And then our monthly payments will be so much lower than what you're paying out right now. And I was like, this sounds right. That sounds like it makes sense. But I just felt really uneasy. I did actually have a word with a mortgage broker, and he said, don't do it. Like the amount of money that you'd have to pay out for the get out fee would be so significant that overall financially it doesn't benefit you. So I went back and I said to him, look, this is what my mortgage broker said. It kind of shut him up for a while, but it only shut him up temporarily. And then he kind of came back to it like a year later and he was like, you need to change it. You need to change it. And I remember saying to him, oh, I feel like you're just pushing me into something and just so that you can get your name on it. I don't understand why you're doing this. I don't understand the point. Why don't we just wait? If we're supposedly going to get married anyway, then what does it matter? But he wouldn't let it go. He was like a dog without a bone. He just kept on saying it and saying it. And I just, you know what? I think I just gave in. I think my confidence was being chipped away at in other areas as well within the relationship. And so I think by then it was kind of like easier for me to give in. And like I said, from the outside, it kind of all looked fine. And if anything, we're looking to kind of be more committed. So that's how I ended up handing over the mortgage. And then once the mortgage changed, it was like, oh, just as a quick add on, why don't you change the deeds as well? And we'll have it in shared names. And the bank made that very convenient and very easy to do. So that's how it happened.
Rachel, you said before that I didn't have a full choice with these
Mm,
mortgage and deeds. And it sounds like this was a slow process, like you're describing. My confidence had been chipped away in other areas. Do you think
mm,
looking back on this, was this, and obviously I don't know the relationship, I couldn't possibly know, but was this a master plan on his part? Like, was this years in the making? Like, ultimately, my question is, how can someone else in this situation, how can they look for warning signs? Because, like you said, a lot of these things sounded like common sense ideas at the time, but yet
mm.
you also said, I just felt really uneasy. Like, I know that's probably five questions all wrapped into one, but like, can you give me a sense of what someone else can look for? And if you think this was like a plan all along?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to sound a little bit wishy-washy just to start off with, but I really think that your instincts and your feelings are worth paying attention to. And if I had really explored those feelings of discomfort around the situation around money, I probably would have heard myself and thought, this does not sound right. But I think in terms of like the face of things or like the practical side of things, I would say that if you are not aware of what is going on with your bills, you know, all of your bills, or there's, for example, I didn't really know anything that was going on in the joint account or what policies would change with the house insurance, things like that. It was like my finances had become a world that I didn't know and that I was unfamiliar with. And I think those are some flags. It's almost like it was like one utility bill at a time that was taken away from me. And you might think, oh, that sounds great. If I was still obviously paying for them, it was like 50-50. It all sounds really fair, but I didn't know what was going on. And it was on the mask of a helpful thing, but it wasn't a helpful thing. And I think after some time, once I'd left, I thought, oh my gosh, it's like he was really thinking about this all along, that it really was like a methodical taking from underneath without me realizing and being aware of what was going on. Because I think when it came to the deeds, which is obviously like the most financially dangerous, is the most kind of damaging, by that time, there were so many steps before it got to that point. And it was interesting that he almost wouldn't let the relationship go, because I tried to get out so many times, but he wouldn't let the relationship go until his name was on the deeds, until his name was on the mortgage. And I think it was like once he knew he had the power, the kind of the legal power and the financial power, that's when he was willing to kind of, right, okay. Because one of the last things he said to me when I broke up with him was, well, my name's on the deeds. And I was like, wow, that's what this is all about. So that was, yeah, that was tough. That was tough.
Yeah, I'm with Brad in that, a bunch of the things, as you're saying them out loud, a couple sharing different accounts, being on different utilities together, like you're living one life together. Brad, I know this is actually what you and Laura did. A variation of that is what, I did with my wife, Danny. And I'm trying to say, well, a lot of this does. It sounds good. And I still feel that way. It is good, but it's only good when
Mm,
people are acting in good faith. And what you're
mm,
rightly saying is he was just 1 degree at a time, trying to rip control away from you. And it almost sounds like, and you don't know what's going through someone's mindset. There are just bad people out there, but there's also people that are
mm,
doing something for various reasons, like maybe insecurity, like, for him to
mm,
hold on to the relationship, he felt like he needed to have more control over your life. That would be more likely to keep you tethered. And I'm saying this from a position, it's just a question phrased like a statement.
mm,
Like in the beginning, for him, security looked like more of your financial life being wrapped up in his. And then at some point, even that, which is poisoned already, gets even more poisoned into, oh, I can really damage her if she ever tries to leave.
mm.
Do you think that, like, because I doubt at the very beginning when you're starting, when the relationship's new, I very much doubt it looks like I want to destroy her life. But I'm just curious, like, do you think there's any element of truth there where it starts out as control to cover up my own insecurity about a relationship, and then down the road, you see it go even more to the dark side where it's like, all right, I'm going to make her pay.
Oh, absolutely. Like at the start, he was like a completely different person. I think he even sort of just in the way that he looked, even just seems to be totally different to how he ended up being as a person. And it's that drip drip effect, and it happens so gradually. It's almost unnoticeable to yourself. Even it's very manipulative, but I think you're right. I think it's based on or out of insecurity, or I would argue there are elements of where I feel that actually this happened to him. I think financial abuse happened to him a couple of times, and so I think there's that kind of emotional baggage that he had that was kind of not dealt with and not processed. And then it gave him a sense of kind of satisfaction or his own understanding of justice to kind of take it where he could from me, and give him a sense of power where he lacked power in another situation. So I think that's part of the driving force. But I do have to say, like, there were incidences of violence as well. And so I think although it was like it was said to me as like, oh, that was a one-off, it will never happen again, I'm so sorry, this is a wake-up call, I'm going to really deal with my anger issues, I just need your help, you're going to help me with this. And I kind of like believed that I was this person that was going to kind of help him work out his problems and his insecurities. And I kind of believed that he valued me and the support that I was giving him, but actually underneath it all there was so much resentment. And I think another aspect of it as well is he had come from a place of a lot of debt when we were started in the relationship, and I was at the start of a very successful career, and we are kind of really like two polar opposites. And I think instead of being like, oh, good for you, wow, you got promoted, that's great, you'll get an increase in pay, although those things were said, I think actually there was a lot of jealousy behind that, for him feeling so far behind. And then those kind of very traditional ideas about where a man should be, and like the whole breadwinner and their role, and they should be the one that's kind of like got the money. And actually, sorry, could I kind of go off on a tangent, but for example, I remember coming home a couple of times. This is towards the end of the relationship, and I came home and I found him sitting on the bed reading my pay slips, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "Oh, I just think it's so unfair. You get paid more than me." And I said, "Well, I work really, really hard. Like, what are you doing?" And he just said, "Oh, it's just so unfair. Like, men are meant to be paid more than women. I don't
Wow.
see the patriarchy working in my favor." And I was like, "You've got
Wow.
to be kidding." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm joking. I'm joking." But now I look back and think he wasn't joking. He
Not
really
joking.
meant that.
Rachel, you said a few minutes ago something that just jumped off the page for me. You said instincts and feelings are worth paying attention to. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, how do you start trusting your own instincts more? I mean, so many of us think, oh, we should be intellectual and everything should be cerebral. But I agree with you. I think instincts and feelings are critically important. I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, well, I think following instincts and feelings has been what's got me out of this, but it's been incredibly hard. So I think paying attention to those feelings are have been my savior. I describe financial abuse as like a psychological assault, and it's a hard one to overcome. I think you're psychologically wounded, your trust is so broken, and I think that can damage the relationship that you have with yourself. But I think it's building that sense of trust with yourself and remembering to, I guess, pay attention to you as a person, spend time, I would say, in meditation and therapy, counseling, all those things. They're not indulgences. I think they're really necessities to life. I think actually people don't pay attention to like, actually, this makes me feel good. This person makes me feel good. Or thinking like this makes me feel good. And following those things that lift you rather than those things that bring you down, or feeling like you have a sense of obligation or commitments that just make you feel really down about yourself. Actually, you don't have to do these things that you don't want to do out of obligation. There's no such thing. If you're not making decisions willingly and freely, I'd look at why that is and how you might have ended up in there. Because I think it's a slippery slope. I think you can give away like bits of your power and you end up giving away so much. And that's when you're in a really dangerous situation. And just to kind of like what you're saying about feelings as well, I think it's so important to talk about your feelings around money. And I think that would be like my number one big bit of advice if there's anything to take away today. What money represents to us individually really, really varies. And it says so much about our story, our upbringing, of who we are and how we've come to be. So, for example, like my home, it is, oh my gosh, it represents my career, my sacrifice, my hard work, coming from like a working class background and building myself up and getting to this point. My home is my safety, my security. It means all of these things. It's not just cash, it's not just cold, hard cash, it's so much more. And so when we begin to understand what these assets that we have and what they mean to us, or even our belongings, I don't think are necessarily just belongings. I think they represent things to us symbolically, if that doesn't sound too deep. But yeah, I think that's what I mean. Like feelings are so important around what we have in our lives. So that's why it's so important to pay attention to them.
Yeah, for our audience, there's a lot more to your story, and we're gonna talk about what it looked like to extricate yourself from this, and just your understanding of how the system works now, having gone through this
Mm.
process. I wanted to. I think it's important just for our audience listening to this to emphasize a couple key points here, and we were getting at this earlier, and I think I heard you say something similar, but I just want to see if we're on the same page. In a relationship, I think most relationships, not all, but most relationships would benefit from talking about their finances together. Best practices in some cases may look like a
Mhm.
variation of a joint check. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with having someone else's name on the deed, or
Mhm.
merging your finances, or like none of that. That isn't the target of today's conversation. It sounds like there's
Yeah.
two things that got us here. One was the person that you were in a relationship with was acting in bad faith. You had little warning
Mhm.
signs, but you just didn't give them enough time to air and figure out what to do about it. That's one. So you had these warning signs. You didn't give your gut enough of a chance to really take those seriously and act on that. And then two, over
Mm.
time, as your sense of self-worth was being dragged down, as your sense of control was being ripped away, as these tiny little cuts were happening, you began to absolve yourself of the responsibility to really look at any of the finances. Like, all right, fine. You've worn me out. He's just going to handle it.
Yeah.
With each additional piece of your financial life that was given or ripped away from you, it made it harder for you to then have those money conversations. So it was this death by a thousand cuts. And if you were to go back now, it's like, no, every single one of those transactions were important. Hold on to that. Don't lose that control, because this next chapter is really predicated on the fact that there was maybe years where you just didn't have access to this information. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good way. You explained that very well. Yeah. It's very articulate. Yeah.
Team effort. Okay. Well, no, here's why I wanted to set this up. You've been in a relationship for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, this has truly become a train wreck. I mean, it's just a disaster from a relationship perspective. It's a disaster for your financial picture. But I don't even know if at the end of the relationship, you realized how bad it was. Can you help our audience understand where you found yourself at the end of this relationship?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So once I left, I was then faced with this horrific legal battle, which I'm still actually in the kind of tail end of it right now. So it's been like 27 months of just such a horrific ordeal. He essentially had the legal upper hand. Once your name is on the deeds of a property, it falls under an area of law called talata. And it's a very black and white area of law where it's like, it's a contract you signed. You have to honor these legally binding contracts. These are laws of the land, so to speak. Yeah. So I felt like I didn't have a defense that I wanted or that I needed. I was struggling to find the language. Coercive control was something that I'd heard of, but I didn't fully understand. I certainly didn't identify with coercive control of behavior for myself. And then using that term domestic abuse, domestic violence, I thought, no, that's not me. That's not me. That's not who I am. But that's was. And actually, when you're getting or trying to get legal defense to manage this, you have to have the right language and you have to be informed. When you're going through realizing the kind of relationship you were in, there's so much going on. You're not always in that place. And to be articulate and clear and confident when you're just kind of going through such a psychological ordeal is not easy. So for me, I began to develop PTSD. And as a result of that, I wasn't able to do my job. So this career that I'd really kind of built up over the course of 12 years, I had to give up. I couldn't manage a legal battle that required so much of me, as well as managing two departments in a secondary school. So I had to let that go and I just had to leave one day. I didn't leave in the way that I would have liked to, with any kind of thank yous or goodbyes for serving the school for 10 years. It was just literally like I was in one day and out the next, because I just had such a mental breakdown from everything. And I think it was a legal battle, but I think it was also coming to terms with the relationship, all kind of compounding at the same time. But the thing is, because of me no longer being in the profession I'd been in, it meant that when we finally arrived at a settlement, I actually couldn't pay it because I couldn't take out the equity from my home. Although before that, I'd had agreements in principle to take out the equity to buy him out. I could no longer do that. So it further complicated the situation and it further dragged out the legal battle. So that's how it gets worse. And that's what I mean when I say it's a psychological assault. It really, really is. It really kind of, it damages you, and it takes a long time to get better, to get well, first of all, mentally and psychologically, but also in a kind of practical world as well.
In reading an article that you wrote on your website, there was a paragraph that just was so powerful. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read it here because I think
Go for it.
not only, right, was this an assault, but it was a systemic assault. And I don't think I would have fully grasped that until I read this. So you wrote, perhaps it goes without saying that your sense of trust, not just in the individual, but in humanity as a whole, is greatly injured. I always find it
Mm,
amusing when people respond to my situation with, that's so unfair. Now you're going to really struggle to trust the next man you meet. Are you kidding me? That's nothing in comparison to my distrust of society as a whole. As if a man not gaining my trust is the real devastation, as opposed to being let down by the criminal justice system, the police system, the banking system, the financial ombudsman, my employer, whose compassion quickly ran out, the couples counselor who did not follow safeguarding procedures, the friends who didn't believe in me, the solicitors and therapists who told me it was my fault in the first place, to name but a few disappointments. I think a hurdle in dating is hardly the real injustice. And Rachel, just reading that, my heart rate is pounding. Like I can't fathom that situation and what that must feel like.
Yeah, but it's so true, like every word of that. Like, I've listed so many societal structures that should be picking up people like me and bringing justice and making sure perpetrators are held to account and that there are sanctions to stop them from doing this again. But yeah, I felt like I went through each individual structure and they did nothing for me and they couldn't help me or defend me. And it kind of only compounds that sense of helplessness and defenselessness. And I think I actually went through 7 solicitors I spoke to in total throughout the course of the legal battle because I just felt like I wasn't getting any defense at all. I remember one solicitor said, "Well, do you have any footage, film footage of him putting a gun to your head?" And I was like, "No, that's ridiculous. We don't even have guns over here." Like, it just seems almost, I can laugh about it now, but I was devastated at the time. Like, how on earth do you think I can begin to defend myself if you ask me such ridiculous requests that of course I can't get that. And I don't know, I think just to kind of bring it around to a positive, what I think is good about my experience is that I have really learned about so many structures. Like I've learned about the police. I actually went to them 4 times. I presented them with my evidence of coercive control. I told them about the physical violence, but yet still they wouldn't do anything. They said it wasn't in their remit. I've been through the banking system. I gave them an absolute run for their money. I'm so proud of myself because I made them people feel really bad. I wasn't rude, but I was just very clear about how they were really letting me down and letting their customers down. And all they could do was reassure me that I've certainly ruffled some feathers further up the system. And I was like, good. But it's not enough. They're still not helping victims of financial abuse enough. And so many of these high street banks in the UK have signed up to the Financial Abuse Code of Conduct. But yet, none of them seem to be adhering to it or doing anything about it. But I do hope that the change in law to make financial abuse a crime will begin to really change the system and bring about fairness to both protect their customers and protect people to prevent it from happening. You probably can't stop it 100%, but at least make it harder, make it more robust, but also enable victims to find it easier to get out of the situations, for it not to be so long and painful and such a drawn out process when it comes to getting away from these ties as well.
Rachel, I love that you were talking about a positive frame on this because you actually have had a real impact out of tragedy, out of crisis. You have been an agent of change. And I just, for our audience to truly, I think they're starting to get a grasp, but I just wanted to nail in on this. Imagine that you've been the victim of emotional, physical, and financial abuse for a period of time spanning 5 to 10 years. You finally, whatever that last thing is, whatever that last incident is that gives you the courage to finally walk away, no matter how damaging that is, you're able to do it. You're able to step away, and then your financial life is devastated. You go to the system, you go to the lawyers, the ombudsmans. I'm going to need an explanation for what an ombudsman is in a second here. But you go to the system, the banking system, et cetera, and they tell you, well, it's all legal. His name is on the credit card. His name, you signed the signature. No, I didn't. He signed me up for that. Well, your name's right there. The entire system says this is totally above and on board. There's no outlet for you. There's no way for you to prove that this isn't just a legal fact. There's nothing that you can do. And they say, if you're going to sort this, you're going to need to work it out with your ex. The one who physically and emotionally violated you, the one that abused your finances and ruined you financially, they're telling you, well, you just need to go have a calm conversation with him and work it out. That's the solution that the system is giving you up to this point, at least in the UK and maybe here in the United States. And clearly, all of us are feeling the rage right now as we hear that. We know that's unacceptable. What does change look like? Rachel, you have actually been part of a process improvement and getting some of the laws changed in the UK. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you don't like the system, you've got to change it, right? So I worked with a charity called Surviving Economic Abuse. I didn't think anything about what I was doing for them. I just thought it was like a little bit of way that I could contribute to change. I didn't think that my actions would have that much significance. Initially, it started off as offering to be interviewed by Katie Binns from the Sunday Times. And that was great to have my story published in the newspaper, in such a high profile newspaper. And then on the back of that, this charity who were informing the domestic abuse bill that was going to come through Parliament, they wanted to have case studies, real life stories of real people where this had happened to them. And so I ended up being one of the 6 case studies that accompanied the brief, which was read by the Bill Committee members of Parliament. So my story actually was used to change the law. And actually, it was only yesterday that I heard the news that the bill has finished coming through the House of Commons. It is still yet to go through the House of Lords before it gets royal assent, which, by the way, I had no idea what any of that meant either until until this whole process. But basically, it's the transition of drafting a new law or a new crime and it being made an actual crime, so that would actually have an impact and change society. Because nothing, you don't click your fingers and change the law. There has to be a process. So we are solidly through the process now, and we are much closer to it becoming a reality and it actually shaping and rechanging our society and the financial landscape. So that's really exciting. But on another kind of like bring it back down to the personal side, have felt so devastated by the friends that didn't believe me when I told them what was going on, or didn't even have the opportunity to tell them what was going on. So the people that don't believe me, I just think that's hilarious because they might not believe me, but yet Parliament believes me, and that's informing the whole of the legal system. So all I can say is vindication feels really good. So it is very satisfying that some might not believe me, but the legal system does.
Rachel, that is amazing. And part of the vindication or picking yourself up is learning new skills, right? I mean, you're describing this entire process, and all along the way, you had to advocate for yourself because nobody was doing it for you. All the systems that were set up that were supposed to help didn't, right? They failed you every single step of
Mm,
the way. And I'm curious if you could
mm.
talk to us about that skill building and that sense of belief that you had to have in yourself after it had been taken away for so many years, right? Like, how did you pick yourself up and move forward?
Yeah, I think I'm still surprised at where I am right now and how far I've come. I didn't think it was possible at certain points. I remember when I was trying to find legal defense and I had a list of solicitors to call. And I remember calling each individual solicitor, but it was so hard to speak to and approach to a complete stranger and tell them about the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. Just talk to them freely and openly about domestic violence, domestic abuse, financial abuse, and how you've just signed over your deeds. I remember having a 15-minute conversation and then I would have to put the phone down and just recover from a panic attack. I could barely keep myself together and my head was just in such a bad place. My confidence was completely gone, but also I felt my sanity was like slipping away from me. Like I could not keep all of this together, like everything that I needed to do to get out. But yeah, I was still dealing with the wound of being so hurt and the sense of loss as well, that even leaving a healthy, good relationship would be, you have that sense of loss. But I was really, really disorientated and was not supported out of it. But I think with every little action that I took, so whether it was having that meeting with a solicitor or meeting with the next solicitor and getting better at interviewing them before I speak with them and getting a little bit more confident with each of those conversations and looking for the signs of a good legal defense and looking out for the bad ones as well. That was a great skill in itself. Then approaching the banks and having the confidence to confront them and tell them what they had done wrong and just complaining. Like I'd never really complained, maybe it's like a very kind of British, very polite. We don't like to make a fuss or say anything that might upset anybody. And yeah, I was so fed up and so angry, and I was able to challenge that anger and become better at finding the language and speaking it clearly and confidently and putting it back on them. And in a way, I knew that they weren't going to do anything, they weren't going to change anything, but I was going to go full pelt and it just made me throw the best that I could at them in terms of kind of moral punches. So I think that really helped build my confidence and made me realize that I can speak up for myself. And I also really took to writing like obsessively. And I still do that now. Like I write every single day without fail. And I've really managed to fine tune how I find words to express myself, but also how to express the situation. And I do that now, not just for me, but I do that for the sake of all the other people who have been affected by these issues, who I know find it so hard to stand up for themselves and to speak up for themselves because perhaps they don't have the language. Maybe English is not their first language, for example, or they don't have the confidence. They're so emotionally beaten up, they can't talk about it. And I think there's such a huge sense of shame that comes around these issues. And poverty in itself is such a shame-ridden position or state to be in, whether it's your fault or not, you just feel that. And that secrecy builds. So for me, I think finding your voice and just letting go of that shame is when you begin to realize like your skills that you can have and what you can bring forward and push forward into the world. And so for me, it is words, language. I think words are so powerful. I think they are like spells. You can really bring about some good and fantastic things, but you can also bring about some terrible things as well, literally just by the words that you use. So I think that's a big thing for me. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered that question fully, but
Oh,
yeah.
no, you certainly did. I mean, that's remarkable. And yeah, you said so many things there that I was furiously writing down. You're talking about finding your voice. And you said, with every little action I took, you got more confident and competent, right? And that's how you build habits and skills and just those
Mm.
tiny little actions, right? It's this identity of who you were that day and who you were becoming. I wanted to ask about that writing process, if you don't mind, because I'm
Okay.
sure there's someone out there who could get value from that, right? From some catharsis of their own writing. Can you talk to us about, if you don't mind, if it's not too personal,
Mm.
just the actual process? Like, do you do that in the morning? What does it look like? Could you talk us through that?
I've always been like a big fan of journaling. And interestingly, I think when I really got into that relationship, that's when it stopped. I kind of stopped expressing myself even privately, let alone more publicly. But yeah, I picked up the habit I had before, which is writing in the evenings for me. I feel it kind of declutters my brain before I go to sleep. When I was really dealing with the symptoms of PTSD, I just would have to write down as a way to ground myself and whatever thoughts I had that were coming into my head and whatever feelings were coming up, just write it down and just don't filter, just let everything flow. Don't judge it, just write it. And I would write reams and reams. I did begin to put things out there on a blog, but not a lot. I didn't really have the confidence, I think, and I wasn't ready. I don't blame myself for that. There was so much going on. I wasn't quite ready to put myself out there. But I think all of those things are beginning to share pieces that I'd written with friends who gave me some really lovely feedback, just again gave me the confidence. And then I'd been formulating this idea a little bit, or maybe just sort of entertaining the idea of using my experience to help others. And then I had a few sort of good and necessary kicks up the butt from a few friends, and they were just like, do it, just do it now, do it this week. So when I started the blog, it became really easy. It's like even now I find it really easy, and I naturally feel a sense of I need to write another thing in a week's time. I don't even need to consciously remind myself. I just Tuesday's blog day.
Mm.
And so I'll be writing another post probably about this interview later on today or tomorrow.
Well, I want to talk about kind of this next inflection point for you and the context of what you've gone from being a victim to now a victim and an advocate, and a very potent, powerful advocate because of that victim experience. I want to talk about our worlds colliding here in the context of you were introduced to us by our good friend Alan Donegan, who is the host of the Rebel Entrepreneur podcast. And you found Alan, my understanding is by going to a pop-up event. And I'm curious what drew you to that event, and just, I want to hear a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey because, as you said, you have become very good at telling your story. You know the power of words, and you have a story to tell, and you can affect change with that story. And the story is different depending on the person that you're trying to reach. Not different, but the way you're presenting it's different to lawyers, to banks, to ombudsmans, oh, my least favorite word ever, to individuals that are going through crisis. Like, you can speak now, it's the same story, but the way it's framed is different. You can be that conduit. You can connect those two parties and really see change happen. Tell us, a little bit more about your experience with Alan and what that's meant to you so far.
Yeah, so I had quit teaching. I didn't want to go back. I knew I didn't want to go back, still don't want to go back. And I thought, well, I don't want to teach art in a school. I want to be a personal trainer and I love fitness. I'm really into it. So I went to the pop up business school thinking, well, they'll help me set up a business as a personal trainer. And when the school began talking about using your experience and business that was authentic and in line with your experiences and who you really are, I had this huge epiphany and this existential crisis of, oh my goodness, I think I'm going to have to completely dramatically change the plan. And perhaps I could really use my experience of financial abuse to help others. So I announced that at the pop up business school when Alan happened to be there, which he actually isn't normally there. It was Sean who was teaching at that time on that day. And I just stood up and I announced that I don't think I want to be a personal trainer. I think I want to help people with financial abuse. And it was during the time that I was at pop up business school that the story got released in the Sunday Times and that I got news from the charity Surviving Economic Abuse that I was going to be helping them in quite a significant way. So it's like everything that kind of came together at one point. And speaking to Alan personally, he was very supportive of my idea. At that point, it was just so loose, such a loose concept and idea. Just literally, I want to use my experience to help others and set up a business. And he said, yeah, think about how you monetize that. And I was like, oh God, I have no idea. So it took a while to begin to formulate a plan. And if I'm totally honest, I am still working on that plan. And I think this podcast is actually one of my starting points to begin to build on a business and put some of the dreams I have, like getting into the banks and informing them about the systems that they need to change to make them safer for members of the public. Yeah, so that's how I met Alan, and I know that my story resonated with him. And I think just having somebody like Alan in your court means an awful lot, and is a source of great encouragement in itself.
And even as you're saying that, and this is the thing, you can be an agent of change and you can build a business around that. I mean, you can throw your best energy at something that you know is leaving the world a better place. And there's a way for you to provide for yourself and your family through that process. Even as you're saying this out loud, I'm immediately thinking, Rachel, of the same organizations that you struggled to get traction with. And then now a law being changed to basically say to these organizations, you're accountable for preventing this or doing your part. Well, what does it look like? There's nothing in their current guidelines or processes to help them implement this effective strategy to prevent this from happening on their watch. Banks that are seeing the victims of this, the police, solicitors, ombudsmen. I'm not saying it again, but there's all these organizations that have interactions with victims of financial abuse, and they don't have the skill set necessary to be able to help these individuals. How can you help them bridge that gap? How powerful would it be to have someone that understands their language and what tools they have at their disposal, but also understands it from the victim's perspective that can help create a process? So to me, I mean, something that just screams is one, being able to have a platform where victims who are looking for resources, you didn't have the words on day one. You didn't understand what lawyers, what these solicitors, what individuals, what banks needed to hear. You had to think through that language. So one is creating that platform so victims of financial abuse can understand the way that the terms they need to use to get more traction and less frustration. And then two, on the other side of that, work with these organizations as a consultant to help them improve and streamline their policies so that we spend less time talking over each other and more time helping each other. I think that to me seems like a natural place for a business like this. I'm just curious, is that kind of what you and Alan have talked about, or is there something that I'm missing entirely?
Such a big question. I guess what I will say is I just think it makes an amazing story to have somebody who has experienced financial abuse and then finds not just their own sense of empowerment, but also finds financial empowerment and can cure the crime with their own skills. I just like the sound of that as a story. So I just kind of made a decision that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this right with my using my experience that I have been through. It's an interesting situation to be in because I feel like I'm creating something that has never existed. And we're talking about a law that didn't exist and now it does. We say it doesn't exist, I know thousands of people who would say they've experienced it and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And we all can morally agree that this is not okay and that this is theft, extortion is not all right. But it isn't actually a crime yet. Not yet, but it will be. So I'm riding the wave of change, as cheesy as that sounds. And I want to use the knowledge and the experience that I have, both cerebrally, but also emotionally, to really, ideally, I want to get straight into the banks and I want to tell them what they need to be doing to stop this from happening. Because I have a few ideas, actually, even some quite basic suggestions on what they could do to change their systems to make them safer, to protect their customers, but also to protect themselves. So just as a little example, I don't think selling products like loans and mortgages, selling credit to people who are going to take the privilege but not the responsibility. So they take the money, they'll take the cash, but they're not actually prepared to pay it themselves. They're going to try and get someone else to pay that for the next however many years. I don't think that's a good business move for the banks either, because they're setting themselves up for customers who are going to be shaky about paying it. They're going to argue as to who should be paying it. That chasing up those calls with those clients is going to cost the bank money. It's going to cost the bank time. So it's not even beneficial to the banks to missell their products. So I would like to get into the bank and tell them what they need to do to make their systems more robust and more clear. I think banks now, perhaps post COVID-19 as well, they might be more interested in being a bank that is fair, that cares about their customers, that wants to work with the people who are disadvantaged and who are vulnerable. So that's like my main dream. That's my main aim. But I would like to help people one-to-one as well. But I don't know if that's something in some ways further down the line. But I think offering consultation is probably my overall idea. So whether it's offering consultation to the banks or to the housing associations, to lawyers themselves, because they're going to need to be informed in the changes to law as well. But I think even how lawyers deal and address potential customers and clients dealing with some of these issues, I think if they had an awareness of that and how to have the better people skills, I think that could be beneficial. But I will also be writing about my story and putting that out there as well. So that probably doesn't sound very clear. And there's just a few things that are just thrown out there, but that just gives you an idea of what I'd like to do moving forward.
Yeah, and I think your story is so powerful. Obviously, the emotion comes through and your passion to make the world a better place. It reminds me of the quote that we've mentioned here a few times on the podcast from Margaret Mead. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And it takes people like you to stand up and see an injustice and try to change it for the better. So I'm just blown away by your story.
Thank you.
Rachel, someone's listening to this and they've been impacted by this. This is something they've been experiencing silently. They haven't had anyone that believed them or could help them up to this point, that didn't even know what words to use to call it because it just didn't fit into any clean boxes that they saw out there. What is the best way for someone to reach out to you or to find out more about what you're doing?
Okay, so I'm on Instagram under Nebu_wealth. Nebu is Nebu. I also have a blog, rachelpartleton.wordpress.com, and I'm currently building a website, nebuwealth.com. So any of those formats are good.
Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be able to talk about these issues and to raise awareness to them. And thank you for being so good at listening. I appreciate that.
All right, everyone, I hope you got value from today's episode. Maybe you are experiencing financial abuse, or you know someone that you've had this gut check, you think they might be experiencing financial abuse. And I get that, not all the terms matched up one to one, especially, Rachel's from the UK. Not every term was exactly the same, but you know it when you see it. And if you have that gut feeling, I might be experiencing this, or I know someone that might be experiencing this, share this episode with them. Have them listen to it and take action on it. Maybe it's just reaching out to Rachel. Maybe it's having someone that you can confide in and speak a common language. Let's be the change that we want to see in the world. Let's not be afraid to turn over that stone, because it's scary what you might see on the other side. There's always a way to change the outcome, change the narrative, change the story. This is the first day in the rest of your life. What are we going to do with it? All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.